Really excited to be here tonight. With the podcast as it's evolved, I have started off by doing pre-recorded sessions, moved to doing some of those live, and I'm really excited that tonight I have a fantastic guest who's joined me. I'd like to introduce everyone to Ganesh. Ganesh is a friend I have made who is well, let me not steal your thunder. Ganesh, I'm going to change the slide just to a big picture of yourself, which I'm sure you really want to see. I'm going to be quiet. Ganesh, can I get you to introduce yourself to the audience tonight?
Fabulous. Yes. I am. My name's Ganesh. I'm from Wellington in New Zealand. So I'm pretty much as far away from you as I possibly can be. But through the miracle of modern technology, we're able to speak in real time over some really interesting issues. So I'm very excited about that. I am a lifelong member of the church and a former bishop. But I have, in the last few years, been very interested in history. And so I've done a lot of research and writing a book, a biography of Joseph Smith, and looking at his life in depth. And as part of that, of course, I've had to look and examine the Book of Mormon quite closely, and including the Doctrine and Covenants and a lot of other documents as part of the Joseph Smith's Papers project, which makes it possible for anybody in the world, and certainly me in New Zealand in my lounge, to be able to do a lot of research and understand quite a bit about the early church, because those documents are freely available to anybody.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really delighted to have you here. I'm really excited about this book you're writing. I'm hoping that we can have a good chat when you finally publish and see if I can get a copy of that. I'm looking forward to being able to read your understanding of Joseph and that early church, because that for me is something that fascinates me. Tonight then, the conversation today is based around this week's Come Follow Me curriculum. All right. Come Follow Me this week is in church is designed to follow Doctrine and Covenants section 3 through section 5. And it's quite an interesting choice of sections actually, because section 3 and section 5 kind of intermesh and overlap with each other. Okay, and section 4 is a very different theme in the middle. So for the audience, what I want to do is we're going to spend a little bit of time. Mainly, I want to focus on section 3 and section 5. For those of you who are unfamiliar, who haven't done your Come Follow Me studying for Sunday this week, those sections are based around quite a significant event in the early part of the translation of the Book of Mormon. And they focus around a character by the name of Martin Harris. Martin Harris was a contemporary of Joseph. He served as Joseph's scribe, and he was helping with that translation of the Book of Mormon. And then there were some problems based around some things that Martin wanted to do to be able to show his wife why he was doing what he was doing. So Ganesh, can I just start the story here? Who the heck was Martin Harris?
Right, so Martin Harris is an older gentleman. He's 20 years older than Joseph, so he's quite a lot more senior. He's effectively a wealthy businessman, farmer, just north of Palmyra, and he has a large farm. He's obviously very capable and able, and he's managed to build himself a little bit of an empire when it comes to the area, and he's well known in the area. He is from that same New England folk magic culture that is prevalent in this Western New York area, because a number of particularly New Englanders fled during the famine pretty much of 1815 and came through to a warmer climate to grow. And Martin Harris was one of those first people there, and he manages to make quite a splash and provide for his family quite well. So he's great. He's well known. He's quite well respected, although he is quite speculative. And he is a little, he's very spiritual, but he has lots of different ideas. And of course, at the time, in this particular space, there's a lot of revivals, there's a lot of spiritualism, there's a lot of kind of excitement around religion. And Martin Harris is a dabbler. He's generally a universalist, so he believes in the universal salvation of Jesus, which means that puts him on at odds with some of the more established churches in Palmyra. But he is a seeker. He wants to know more. He is, and he's prone to a good scheme because he wants to make money, and but he wants to be right with God. So he's prone to speculative things, and that's how he kind of meets Joseph, because the talk of the town is that Joseph is a treasure digger, but that he's found something of value that is maybe even bigger than a monetary treasure. It's a spiritual treasure, some kind of book that talks about American Indian origins, and Martin is intrigued.
Thank you. Quick question.
Say that again. I'm not getting you.
Interesting to understand, because when people are talking about the church, very often people use this treasure digging as a critique towards the church and the gospel. Okay, how prevalent was this worldview of treasure digging and magical mysticism? Are we talking about someone who is normal for the culture in the area, or is this actually what we would expect in that New England area at the time?
So it was very prevalent in New England, and then when those migrants came through to Western New York, lots of people came with that kind of culture. So it is heavily prevalent in Joseph Smith's immediate neighborhood. However, at the same time, those, and it was practiced kind of on the margins. If you think of what gambling would be today, you'd expect that, some rich people gamble, but a lot of poor people gamble. And so it's really done by the lowest class, the more marginalized, the least economic, because it's very speculative. Nobody's actually finding any treasure. So it's a bit of a have in some respects, but people are very steeped in it. They're steeped in this kind of understanding of a magical unseen world that is operating behind the scenes, maybe even thwarting them from achieving greatness. And so there are definitely people doing it. Joseph and his immediate neighbors are doing it, but there are also lots of people from maybe other walks of life, certainly in the church community, which are looking at it very spuriously, or thinking that it's incredibly problematic. Even we've got a great account from Benjamin Franklin in 1770. So this is 50 years earlier, and he's talking about the prevalent treasure digging culture of New England, and really going to town on how bad this is for the economy and for people in general. And so it's largely looked at in a negative way, even by the people around Joseph. But his immediate neighbors, because they're all in the same kind of circumstances as he is, they are sometimes doing this or participating in it, or at least putting up with it.
I appreciate your thoughts there. But it would be fair to say then that this treasure digging spiritualist environment is the culture of the day. And so I imagine when Martin and Joseph meet and start to talk, that this would be something that would be of interest and would perhaps attract Martin towards working with the young Joseph.
Yes, and Martin tells the story that he had heard about Joseph, but he wanted to check him out independently of Joseph. So he went to the family, he talked to the dad, he talked to the rest of the brothers, and then he got a feel for what was going on, and then he quizzed Joseph, and Joseph's account was was the same, and so he felt confident that there was something special happening to the Smith family, and he wanted to be involved in some way. And it's likely that he saw this as a money-making opportunity. And Lucy Harris, his wife, talks about this project in those terms. He, the idea that Native American origins were a source of really great interest. There were other books that were written around the time, looking at Native Americans and maybe their Christian origins. And so this was something that people were interested in, and that might sell as a kind of a bestseller. And Martin saw that potential in Joseph and the understandings that he was getting from Joseph.
Yes. Do you think it'd be fair to say that Martin felt that he was probably making a sound investment that was going to pay off for him down the line in the initial point?
Absolutely, he was funding everything. Joseph, in something that I don't think members of the church realized, Joseph was incredibly poor, destitute. Before 1827, the family had lost the family farm. They were tenants on their land. The parents were feeling incredibly vulnerable about their future. Joseph wanted to get married and have a family, so he would hire him, and there just wasn't much there for them to be able to do that. And so it was a dire kind of circumstance. And so the Smith family relate that they saw this as a potential to change their family fortunes. And so this was the backdrop of the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon originally looked like a opportunity to make money, to finance the family, to get them ahead. And so, yeah, that's the basis for it. And Martin Harris funded Joseph and Emma in their removal to Harmony, Pennsylvania. Martin Harris gave Joseph $50, and that was what they used to basically get themselves to Emma's family's place, because things were getting pretty rough in Palmyra, and this allowed Joseph to have some space from critics around his area. And remember, Joseph was from this money-digging environment, and when his former colleagues heard about the fact that he had plates, some kind of treasure, they felt like they were entitled to it because they were business partners, and Joseph wasn't sharing. And so this caused a lot of harassment in Palmyra. And so Joseph and Emma left and started the project in Harmony, Pennsylvania, and producing the Book of Mormon. Martin Harris, so interested, went to visit them and understand what was going on. Joseph, copied off some characters for him, which he then went to authenticate with people like Charles Anthon and others in New York. And Martin felt convinced that Joseph was engaged in something legitimate, and came back to be his scribe. And so Martin Harris was Joseph's scribe between April 12th, 1828 and June the 14th, 1828. So basically 2 months.
You know what? But I love that. I can talk about the story. I couldn't give you those dates. I love the level of detail that you have here. But just so I'm understanding what you're saying to me, effectively, what we're saying is that if we look at the backdrop of the world they're living at the time, it's an environment, it's a world that's clouded in this magic, this mysticism. It's culturally part of what's going on, maybe frowned upon, but kind of not within the circles that Joseph and Martin were walking in. And Martin is therefore interested in the financial gain initially of the whole project, if you like. You talked about Joseph moving to Harmony to get away from issues that he had in Palmyra, and that he had people that were perhaps business partners who perhaps felt that if there were gold plates involved, they should have a bit of this action as well. And so there's a little bit of tension going on. Now, we've mentioned the project. Okay, just to bring it into context, people who are following that, the project obviously we're talking about is Joseph has gone. He's met with Moroni, as we talked about last week. Moroni has finally given him these plates of gold, and he's taken them home, and he's tasked with translating them. And this is the process of translation. And Martin is financing this He's digging deep into his own pockets to pay for Joseph's lifestyle, paying for the things that he's doing, and he's financing the project to translate these plates. Okay, and that's what we're talking about as a backdrop. In the church, we talk about and we learn about the 116 lost pages.
Yes.
What happened?
So during this 2-month period from April to June, and you've got to understand that June the 14th is the day before Emma gives birth to Joseph and Emma's first child. So that's why they stopped. Effectively, the baby was coming. Martin is going to return back to Palmyra. He's been away for 2 months working with Joseph on this project. And Martin is a farmer. And this period of time in the middle of summer, planting crops, getting them in the ground, doing all these things, this is a big deal. This is a big part of his economic viability. And of course, his wife, who is back in Palmyra, she is not excited about this at all, because he's ignoring his responsibilities to provide, from the family farm, and basically just going off on a whim with Joseph and being his scribe. And Martin knows this. He needs to be able to justify it to his wife, and he feels like the manuscript will show her that this thing that he's doing is really important and incredibly fabulous, and it's going to be a great advantage to their family. And so he asks Joseph if he can take the manuscript back. And gosh, I don't think that Joseph can say no. Martin is doing the heavy lifting. He is providing the finances. He is going to publish this book. He's providing food for them, because Emma's family are not supporting this whatsoever, and so they're not giving him anything. Martin's buying the paper. He's providing the ink. He is making this possible, and so Joseph allows him to take the manuscript back with him, because Joseph can't do anything at the moment anyway, to Palmyra, and show them to Lucy and perhaps a few others to convince them of the legitimacy of the work that he's doing. And then what happens, of course, is that Joseph and Emma have their child on June the 15th, a baby boy. Apparently he's named Alvin after Joseph's older brother who died. But this baby either is stillborn or only survives very shortly. It's a baby. Alvin dies. Emma is incredibly sick. She almost dies too. Joseph is really worried. And this goes on for a couple of weeks till her health improves. Lucy Macksmith says that at some point, Emma gets well enough that she insists that Joseph go back to Palmyra and check up on the manuscript, because she's worried. And so Joseph takes a stagecoach and goes back to Palmyra, and confronts Martin Harris, or Martin Harris is requested, and when Martin Harris goes to try and find the pages to give to Joseph, they're gone, and he is bereft, and so is Joseph. Not only has he lost his son, almost lost his wife, but he's lost work for the last 2 months. And like I said, these people are farmers. Joseph is also slightly supposed to be a farmer on his little property of the Hales farm, and it's gone. 2 months of work in the heightened part of their economic ability. This is a devastating loss for somebody who's already poor and is barely making ends meet. He has nothing to show for 2 months worth of work.
Got some questions, some thoughts about what you're talking about here. Obviously, you're relating the story very similarly to how it would be taught within the church. Okay. Yes. And we've got some interesting thoughts that I'd just really like to get your opinion on. Okay. And the first
Oh, we're frozen.
We want to put some humanity against this. Are you there? We seem to be breaking up slightly. Have you got me okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. I want to put some humanity on this. And you're right. You related this story of Emma about to give birth. They then have this child. And unfortunately, that child passes away. That's quite a significant event in somebody's life, and will have a massive impact on them. We have this backdrop of disaster and tragedy in Smith House. At the same time, one of the feelings I get coming through is a complete distrust of Joseph by his mother-in-law and father-in-law, by Martin's wife, and real concern about what's going on. So I imagine that, would you agree that actually this is quite whatever the realities of what's going on, it's quite a stressful and sad time for those people that are involved. And I think we need to be mindful of that. You know,
everybody, right? The Hales are excited about their grandchild. They're probably just putting up with Joseph in this area because Emma is pregnant. You know, like they adore Emma. She is the apple of their eye, and Joseph is that unproductive, speculator that they're worried about is grifting on the family, and this death is just rocksome. Something else you need to know, I think, is really important, is that Joseph tied the Book of Mormon to his son. The anticipation of his son. If you take June the 15th, when little baby Alvin was born, and you go back 9 months, you'll find that it's the 21st of September, 1827. Which is the night that Joseph retrieved the plates. So baby Alvin was conceived with the Book of Mormon, with the retrieval of the gold plates.
No, I didn't know that. I was totally unaware of that. That's a really interesting thought, that if we assume the narrative of the Book of Mormon, that I can see that this is actually a major part of that life of Joseph, and how those two could be interlinked. Obviously, if we look at the story, we have these plates that Martin has asked, not plates, the pages that Martin has asked for. He's taken them away to show his wife, and he's come back. He's lost these pages, and he's devastated about it, as you explained. Now, one of the things that I've always found interesting, okay, and obviously you've been in and around the church for as long as I have, okay, is how this is all taught from a faithful point of view. Okay, and that is the suggestion is that they were stopped from translating, and the big issue was what now, because there was a fear that Martin's wife might tamper with the record that was there to prove that the original document that Joseph had recorded was wrong. And that's how I was always taught this. I don't know whether it's the same in the way the story was shared in New Zealand, but that's how I was always taught that.
Well, that's absolutely the story, because that's the story in Doctrine and Covenants section 10, which you'll get to in a couple of weeks. So, yes, that's absolutely the story, and it's one of the things that you have to understand is that this loss of this manuscript changed the whole project of the Book of Mormon. Firstly, we don't know how many pages it was. We call it the 116 pages because that is what the replacement text is. The replacement text is 116 pages. And so Joseph referred to this lost manuscript in those terms later. But actually, we don't know. There are some indications, and probably the best person and book to look at is Don Bradley's Lost 116 Pages, and he says and gives some good evidence to suggest that actually it was probably over 200 pages worth of text that was lost, and it's basically the Book of Lehi. But this is a huge loss to Joseph, and the fact that it's combined and the same time period as the loss of the baby, and also some of his loss of his credibility with his in-laws, changes the next 6 months for Joseph completely for a couple of reasons. One, it means that he is really introspective about why this has been lost, and also what this might mean for his relationship with God. And I think there's a transformation. That's the idea that he needs to do it exactly. He needs to do it with a humble and contrite spirit. He needs to do it with the idea that Jesus is involved. Otherwise, this project is never going to come off the ground. But also, it changes the scope, because Martin Harris now is unreliable. He is not somebody that Joseph trusts. And in Doctrine and Covenants section 3, of course, he's described as a wicked man by God, right? So this cuts Martin Harris out of the production of the Book of Mormon. He doesn't get to be a scribe anymore. Oliver Cowdery is going to be the scribe in April of 1829. Joseph can't trust Martin. He certainly can't trust Martin's wife. Lucy Macksmith, Joseph's mother, tells that Lucy Harris actually brings up fraud charges against Joseph in early 1829, and the only reason that Joseph wins against that is that Martin Harris, vouches for Joseph that he's real. But Lucy Harris absolutely believes this is a fraud to defraud herself and her husband, and fights this project in the courts and loses. So,
So, quick question for you. Sorry to jump in. Quick question to you on that, Ganesh. I've just changed the slide, and we've got a couple of scriptures there, a few verses from D&C 3, which show Joseph and Martin being told off, basically, in terms of what's happened. But it's interesting, this dynamic with Lucy. I think it's fair to say that Lucy Harris is not a fan. Okay.
No, definitely not a fan.
She's not a fan at all. She's probably very unhappy that her husband is involved with this. Now, when we talked about the problem being that Lucy might change these pages to prove Joseph a fraud, I suspect actually if there was proof that this was real, actually that probably would calm her down a bit, in terms of how she's feeling. And therefore, surely it's much more sensible narrative that Lucy, if she did take those pages, we actually don't know whether she did or not. They've just gone. He could have just dropped them and lost them somewhere. But if she has got those pages, it's more likely that what she's hoping to do is have keep them intact and have a duplicate set and be able to say, look, you've got it wrong, because she's got the original, rather than look to doctor that, and handwriting.
Yes, well, I mean, that goes into more of D&C 10 than these two particular verses, but you're right. And actually, D&C 10 doesn't make a lot of sense, because, for instance, if you go onto the Joseph Smith Papers Project and look at the ways that the manuscript pages, they're very tight. There's no way that you could alter something in the text and for it to look right. You would be able to it'd stand out like a sore thumb. There's no possible way. So this idea that the manuscript pages could be changed is farcical. It's just not possible. You'd look at them and you'd instantly be able to tell that they were changed. So the problem is the Book of Mormon is an oratory production. Joseph is speaking it, the scribe is writing it down, and Joseph is telling the scribe that he's seeing words, and and the scribe needs to write those words down exactly. But that just doesn't square with the historical record, because the ways that the Book of Mormon is, and probably the best person to look at here is William Davis and his book Visions in the Seer Stone, because effectively the Book of Mormon shows an oratory production. It does not show that it's from a previously written text. Joseph is for all intents and purposes, almost coming up with the text as he's speaking, which means that he can't reproduce the lost manuscript word for word, because
but surely if this text was legitimate and what the church claims the Book of Mormon to be, then it should have been easily reproducible, surely.
That's correct. And that's the problem that he is facing with the idea that he has to reproduce this text, because he knows he can't produce it word for word as before, because he doesn't know exactly what he said. He might have the idea of the storyline, but he doesn't know what the words are, because they were a year ago. And he can't recite it word for word. So it's going to be different if he reproduces the lost manuscript. So he has to come up with a way.
If we're talking a tight translation of the Book of Mormon, then
Correct.
what you're saying to me is that reproducing that, unless he literally, if he was able to reproduce a tight translation, then the claims about the Book of Mormon would be true. However, the fact that he wasn't able to do that does cause some questions, at least, about the authenticity of what's coming on and the translation methods and those things like that. Would that be fair?
It's a big plot hole. Yes.
Yeah. I think it's what I'm alluding to.
Look, I think that, Doctrine and Covenants 3 and Doctrine and Covenants 5 give us some really interesting clues into what is going on in the moment, in the space with Martin Harris. One is, and the way that Joseph is feeling about him, because, of course, Doctrine and Covenants section 3, like we've said, the Lord apparently in this revelation believes that Martin Harris is a wicked man. There's nothing in that section that suggests that Martin Harris is going to be a witness to the Book of Mormon later.
Absolutely. We'll come to that in a few seconds, if that's okay, guys, because I want to pick on section 5 in a second. But it's really, really interesting. What I want to just pause and reflect, though, we've talked a lot about this translation of the Book of Mormon, this process with Martin, and this background, how Martin is. One of the things that I found really interesting as we've gone into the Come Follow Me curriculum this year is how different the church was putting their curriculum together than it has historically. If we were doing this 4 years ago, and certainly 8 years ago in the previous iterations of the manual, this lesson will be very, very factually based around Martin, about Doctrine and Covenants, and not Doctrine and Covenants, about the translation of the Book of Mormon and this story. In actual fact, within the manual now, this gets very brief reference. And what the lesson that the church is trying to draw, and the conclusion, that if like the official thing to be taught in the lesson on a Sunday, is actually encourage people to face towards God and not face and listen to other people, because obviously the story is that Martin didn't. Absolutely, and thank you, Nat, in the chat there. He talks about it being a disobedience lesson. Is that it's a lesson about obedience and doing us facing in the right direction, and not being distracted by the world and other things around you, with Martin being distracted by his wife in this instance. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, you can get that from the text, and the verses that you put up on the screen are in that space. The idea that Joseph had listened to Martin, and he's a wicked man, and so basically he's been led astray. The problem with that particular narrative is that you still have to paint Martin as this person who spent 2 months conspiring to destroy Joseph, and that just does not ring true in any sense of the word. Like, he's a farmer. Those 2 months are really precious to him. The fact that he gave them up to be Joseph's scribe suggests that he's really sincere. If he wanted to sink Joseph, he would have sunk him in lots of other ways. He is absolutely a believer. And so actually it does look like Joseph is taking advantage of Martin, and then he's scapegoating Martin when things go wrong, which is really problematic for the beginnings of the Book of Mormon. So that particular lesson about not listening to people and doing it's not really it's not what you can get from the text. It's how you might try and distance yourself from the realities of the text. But if you read the text basically blames Martin for this particular event. But all of the indications, all of the things that Martin did up until this point suggests that he's a sincere follower, really trying to bring this to pass. He's got no reason not to, right? 2 months worth of work, and he doesn't have the manuscript pages. It just seems ridiculous. I mean, it is possible that Lucy Harris, took the manuscript to prove Joseph, or maybe she was just mad and read it and went, "This is just foolery. I'm going to burn them." But she, to her dying day and on her deathbed, she says that she wasn't involved in its loss. She ended up losing a lot. The farm was lost because of the schemes. She had a lot to lose, and she did. So I don't know.
So it's the testimony of the witnesses, where we say that they never changed and recanted their opinion. She also never recanted her story of that was nothing to do with me. It's quite interesting, actually. Doctrine and Covenants 5. Doctrine and Covenants section 5. We move on, and it kind of picks up the story a little bit later. Was there any other occasions? So obviously Martin has hassled Joseph for the pages, and they get lost. Did he stop trying to hassle Joseph for evidence at this point that he could show his wife, or did he continue with that?
Okay, so one of the in Doctrine and Covenants section 5 is really interesting for this, because Martin has not seen the plates. And Doctrine and Covenants 5 tells us this. He's been he's been with Joseph for 2 months as his scribe, producing the manuscript pages from the Book of Mormon. And by the beginning of 1829, Lucy Harris has brought a suit against Joseph Smith, suggesting that he's just a fraud and that he has nothing and he's defrauding her husband. And this gets chucked out. But Martin makes a trip to Harmony, Pennsylvania in March of 1829 to maybe assure himself, or maybe just get the witness that his wife, Lucy Harris, thinks that he should get. And so he asks for a view of the plates, which tells you that he has not seen them. So the original manuscript production in April and May and June of 1828, Martin has not seen the plates at all, ever. And
that's quite significant. It's quite significant, actually. This guy, we're pre-Oliver Cowdery at this point. This guy is Joseph's right-hand man, the financer of the project, his biggest backer, the person that is most invested. And what I'm saying here is, we're getting to this point where we get to D&C 5. He's already got this problem that his wife is absolutely spitting with him. He's lost the papers. And the way I read this, he's kind of saying, "Come on, Joseph, please just show me them. Give me some reassurance that I'm losing my wife, my family, everything I've got. Give me some reassurance that I'm doing the right thing here." Is how I interpret what he's saying to me. And I brought up a couple of verses that I pulled out from D&C 5. And verse 1, "Behold, I say unto you, that as my servant Martin Harris has desired a witness in my hand, that you, my servant Joseph Smith, have got the plates which you have testified of all record that you received of me." Martin is corroborating that Martin is asking as evidence. And then this is what God tells Joseph: "Behold, if they will not believe my words, they would not believe you, my servant Joseph, if it were possible that you should show them all these things which I have committed unto you." Now, this is alluding to the idea that, and it kind of ties into the church's theology and teachings about the plates now. This is suggesting, even if I showed you the plates, you wouldn't believe me, is the way I understand what the scripture is saying. Now, I appreciate that if someone's skeptic, they may look for other explanations. But if Joseph had these plates and he showed them in a way that people could see them, it surely would add credibility, not take credibility away from his story. And if those plates were available for us to see today, would Ab not take credibility away from the story? But this is how the church teaches and how this is perceived at the time.
Yeah, and there's another major problem in this too, because even the witnesses later, we've got the three witnesses: Martin Harris, David Whitmer, and Oliver Cowdery, of course, who are all scribes. And then we have the Whitmer and Smith families as the 8 witnesses. They are all people from the same folk magic, New England, Western New York culture that Joseph is from. And they believe, Martin Harris believes in visions. Oliver Cowdery has a divining rod. David Whitmer has a seer stone. Hiram Page has a seer stone. Joseph Smith Sr. has a seer stone. They're all from that folk magic, esoteric, mind's eye kind of, folk magic culture. So that is really problematic, because none of the people that aren't from this get to see that. Isaac Hale asked to see the plates. He's denied that witness. Emma, Joseph's wife, who is also a scribe, she, in Doctrine and Covenants section 25, is told by the Lord that she's not to murmur because she's not allowed to see the plates. The rest of the Hale and Lewis family, who are in Harmony, Pennsylvania, they don't get to see the plates. Only, apparently, the people who are from this folk magic culture that we're, end up seeing something that they are able to witness. And we don't know what that something is, because they're already from this kind of visionary, mind's eye, culture that suggests that actually they could just be seeing it in their head and feel like it's true, because that's the kind of way that this esoteric folk magic works.
So, a couple of thoughts and a question for you. Okay. It's really interesting. We're starting to see already in section 5 and section 3 a pattern that we're going to see through the Doctrine and Covenants. And that is when Joseph, the pressure is on him and people are asking for him answers for questions and not quite accepting the answers given him. His method of laying the smackdown, if you like, is all of a sudden having a revelation, so that he's now not saying no, God is saying no.
That's right.
All right.
And not only is God saying no, but he's saying, if I gave this to you, this wouldn't be faith, and you can't, it would undermine the work. I am saying that nobody's to see this except at some appointed time and under some very specific circumstances. So it's just, it's incredibly tricky to, and people like Lucy Harris are going, this is a scam, and people like Isaac Hale are saying this is a scam. So this is there's a lot of pressure.
I think what's interesting is it could be seen that very often, whenever there's a difficult question, Joseph reverts to, it ends up being second. Joseph says that God says this, and therefore that becomes the case. And it says something about either he's right and he was dictating revelations, or I think it'd be really interesting to actually have met Joseph and talk to him, because we're talking about a guy with the charisma and the personality to be able to turn around and say, I said that God said that you shouldn't keep asking, that it's time to wind your neck in, and we'll just get on with translating, you're not going to see them. But if you're good and do as you're told in future, you might become a witness to them later.
Oh, we lost you.
And using that to carry what he wants through and assert his authority, or it could at least be seen that way. Question though, okay. Obviously, if we go back to the lesson now is going to talk about how we can learn from this lesson that we don't need to see the plays, and then go reflect on how we can gain a testimony of the book and more for ourselves. And the actual object teach here, so there's 2 object teaches from this story really. First is that make sure you're facing the right way and following the counsel of the right people and not listening to people outside of where we're coming from. And the other object lesson is how are you going to go get your testimony of the Book of Mormon? How do you think the story of the story of these 1,616 pages either adds to or takes away or makes no bearing on getting a testimony of the Book of Mormon?
I think there's a very emotive lesson here. The idea that, well, certainly in Doctrine and Covenants section 10, where the idea that God has a plan for everything and will thwart Satan's, attempts to, derail the Book of Mormon, or in the case of a modern example, your testimony, right? So the idea that you should root yourself in the feeling and the faith of connecting with God over any material kind of understanding or witness of the events. So, and I think that this is clever, because I think that if you go, okay, well, I'm just, what story do I like? Which one makes me feel the best? That makes me feel really good about it. Well, then that's the story I should take as true. Instead of looking at the text and thinking, okay, what is actually happening to the people involved? What is what are the events that are transpiring, and how are people, understanding these events, and how are they witnessing it? I think that, well, for me personally, when I'm looking at the text, I'm really interested in, well, how is this affecting the people at the time, and either, I guess, giving them solace or causing them alarm. So Doctrine and Covenants section 5, Joseph is trying to say, look, you don't need a witness. God is your witness, so take it to him in prayer. And I think that people, that's a takeaway that the church looks at today, but that it ignores the distress that is going on behind the scenes from people like Lucy Harris, who is losing her farm over this particular project, or Isaac Hale, who's just beside himself that Emma is not really being taken care of, that Joseph is doing this speculative project. So yeah, I'm really interested in, okay, who are what's happening in the background. And so actually one of the lessons may be there's a lot of people who are in distress because they're being told, look, just have faith, but the evidence does not look very faithful. It looks very uncertain. It looks very, like somebody's telling stories rather than these are actual actual plates and actual stories, because nobody's seeing the plates. All they're seeing is Joseph with his seer stone in the hat, producing something, and they can't see how that there's any link between what he's saying and what actually is happening. So
I think it's really interesting when you look at the worldview, and I think that to have a really good understanding of the of the authenticity of the Book of Mormon or otherwise, we need to look more at the background and worldview of what's happening and what that actually looks like. And that's what I think one of the things that you brought to the conversation today. I want to move on. I appreciate time is against us. So we were supposed to finish at 9. Are you okay for us to work for a few more minutes?
Yep, we can keep going. Yep.
I've got a quick question. All right. Obviously, if you go to the Come Follow Me manual, like I said, they changed the way they teach things. In previous years, we would be about to come into a lesson all about 3 and 8 witnesses and 11 witnesses, and how we can, and the faithfulnesses, and how they never denied their testimony of the plates. What's interesting, although there is a chapter piece in there called Voices of the Restoration, and a short piece about those, there is no lesson in the Come Follow Me manual. All right, they're no longer actually specifically teaching that as part of the Sunday curriculum, which I found fascinating. But so what I would like, we haven't got time to really dig into all the witnesses today. But obviously, Martin is promised in the scripture we got that he's going to become one of those witnesses, and he does. And one of the things the church will continually come back and say is Martin, as one of the witnesses, never denied his testimony, and this is one of the big points that people will push back and say, the Book of Mormon is true. Look, there were these 11 witnesses, never denied their testimony. How trustworthy is Martin? Did he ever deny his testimony? And can we infer much from the fact that he did or didn't?
It's a good question. Well, firstly, I would suggest that Martin is quite sincere. Like he is a believer. Like there's no doubt about it. He we get to Doctrine and Covenants section 19, and Joseph has to reconvince Martin at the end of the project that he needs to commit to mortgaging his farm for the production of the Book of Mormon, and he does. And then he loses his farm because the Book of Mormon just doesn't sell, very well, and Lucy Harris divorces him because she's losing out too. And he moves to Ohio in a little bit of, desperation, but a lot of kudos for making this possible. So Martin Harris is from the same folk magic, esoteric tradition, and he has a number of really, people that talk about their connection with Martin, talk about him with the idea that he has visions, that he sees things, that he has all kinds of interesting ideas about God and Satan, and that are, would be out of place in the church today, and certainly were weird to the people around him. So he's not a great, reliable, objective witness. He's very subjective. We also know from Joseph Smith's account that actually he, when he was a witness to the plates, David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery and Martin Harris all knelt down together, but Martin Harris felt unworthy, so he actually relieved himself so that the others could have the vision, and he ended up having it later with one-on-one with Joseph. So Martin really wants to do the right thing, and I think looks like he convinces himself that he is doing the right thing by Joseph, by everybody else. He's a bit of a joiner, a bit of a want to please everybody, and he's also he has this kind of visionary part to him. So he's not exceptionally credible later on, and when things really go awry in Ohio in early 1838, and people are asking him, gosh, what's happening? The church is failing, Joseph's revelations are failing, you are a witness of this, you saw all this, and Martin tells them that he saw these plates in his mind's eye, like somebody sees a city through a hill. He just knows it's there. He just hasn't physically seen them with his eyes. And this is talked about in the Joseph Smith Papers Project with the Stephen Burnett's letter, and it really shows that Martin is coming from this esoteric understanding of things, and he gets kicked out of the church, and he follows a number of other groups. Yes, he never denies his testimony. He believes that he saw the plates in his mind's eye. He really feels convinced about that. He's completely sincere. So yes, he doesn't deny his testimony. Was his testimony very reliable from an objective point of view? It never was. And if you take the other things that he testified to during his life, they were really bizarre and sometimes really far out there. So the Book of Mormon, or the plates testimony, is just one of many really odd things that he said and really strongly believed in, that we decide to privilege that particular thing, and we discount and never talk about the other things that he said that were really problematic.
Do you have an example of any of the other things that he said?
So he for instance, one time he talked about how he got woken up in the middle of the night by Satan. He also, he talked about the 8 witnesses, the idea that, they were worried about signing what they signed because they didn't really have the experience that is noted on the witness statement. He joined a number of, he followed David Whitmer for a little while, believed that Joseph was in apostasy and a fallen prophet. So, we say that he didn't deny the Book of Mormon, which is true, but he also didn't believe Joseph was correct up to his dying days. So it's just a little odd.
Thank you. There's some really interesting bits of information there. I think it's really interesting when we're looking at using people like Martin as a witness of the Book of Mormon and the events that go in there, to understand a little bit more about who he is and the kind of person that he was. I think it's really important. I think it's really important if we're going to use him for credibility.
And one of the biggest things is he is completely financially involved in this, right? He is mortgaging his farm for the Book of Mormon. So, and he loses the farm. So this is his involvement. It's kind of like, are you going to get a feeling outside of your financial viability, right? You're going to defend it to you're going to want to see it come to fruition because you've invested in it. And you're going to lose out big if it doesn't come to pass. And this is also true of particularly the other witnesses. Oliver Cowdery gave money to Joseph to purchase the land that that from his father-in-law to be able to, not have to be under his father-in-law's thumb. So Oliver's financially involved. David Whitmer gives up his home and helps with the production of the Book of Mormon, so he's financially involved. All of the 8 witnesses, the Smiths, the Whitmers, and Hiram Page, who's a brother-in-law, if the Book of Mormon doesn't come to fruition, they're going to lose out financially. So everybody, I mean, they're believers, they're absolutely believers. I don't think there's any suggestion that anybody's not telling their version of a truth that they're getting, but they're completely financially tied to the success of the Book of Mormon. It's going to change the family's fortunes, both the Smiths and the Whitmers. So that's a big deal, and I don't think you can get away with that. The people that should, if the Book of Mormon had witnesses that were independent or even antagonistic, like the Hales or the Lewises, that would add to its credibility. The fact that it only involves people who are financially going to benefit from it, plus from the same folk magic tradition, that's a strike against the witness statements. And Martin Harris is just one of the 12 people who get to see this. They're heavily motivated to see this in the best possible light they possibly can.
So what you're saying to me is those people that were witnesses, and we're talking Martins, you're talking the Olivers, we're talking the Whitmer family, his own brother, his own father, those people that were witnesses to that, all have a vested interest in the credibility of that in the short and the long term. What is interesting is the point you made, actually, and if I understand this right, we talk about the not showing the plates because of faith. But if he had just turned around and said to Isaac, "Hey, Isaac, look, this is what we're dealing with," or he turned around to Lucy Harris and said, "Lucy, can I just show you these?" All right. If they'd have seen those, it would change the credibility evidence of the witnesses in a massive landslide way.
Yeah, absolutely. If Lucy Harris had been a witness, wow. That would have changed the scenario.
And they didn't even need to have turned around and said, "I saw those plates and now I'm a believer." If they'd have said, "Joseph showed me some metal plates," don't know what they were, even that would have added credibility to the story, that perhaps when we dig underneath the story of the witnesses, perhaps disappears slightly. It's interesting. Obviously, time is against us. So I just want to get your thoughts very quickly, if that's okay. The other section that is in here is Doctrine and Covenants section 4. Doctrine and Covenants section 4 has nothing to do with the 116 pages. And I find it fascinating that they've sandwiched this in between the two sections that they're looking at. Now, anyone who's been in the church who's served a mission will know this scripture. All right. You served a mission, I believe, Ganesh, yes?
Yes, I did.
Could you still recite this scripture without looking at it?
Yeah. Well, I used to. I don't know if, let's see if I can do it. For behold, the field is white, already to harvest, and lo, he that thrusteth in a sickle with all his might. Not
too bad.
Charity.
Not too bad.
Okay.
I didn't. Actually, for various reasons, I didn't serve a mission, but I'm still very familiar with the scripture. Now, one of the things that's interesting about Doctrine and Covenants section 4, this is the missionary scripture. For behold, the field is white, already to harvest, and lo, he thrust in his sickle. This scripture actually wasn't about missionaries. This was given to Joseph Smith Senior. Joseph Smith Senior never served a mission for the church. He wasn't a missionary. He did other things. He became the patriarch of the church and did other things in support of his son. But he never was a missionary. And I find that interesting. But actually, this is one of my favorite scriptures. All right. And I look at this scripture positively. All right. And wherever I stand in the worldview, I love verse 2. Therefore, O ye but embark in the service of God, seek ye serve him with all your heart, mind, and strength. Okay. And verse 3, most importantly, therefore, if ye have desires to serve God, ye are called to the work. Now, I find this quite interesting because it doesn't say if you're living in the 1820s, 1830s, if Joseph tells you, then you're called to the work. But it doesn't turn around and say, if your bishop brings you and interviews you, and I'm sure you've had many experiences of this, Ganesh, interviews and say, the Lord would like you to serve in such and such a calling. If you have desires to serve God, ye are called to the work. And for me, I find that fascinating. And wherever I stand in my relationship with the gospel, whatever my relationship with the church or with God, and however my view of God is, I think that we can learn a lot from that line. Okay, if you have desires to serve God, and whether your God is Heavenly Father, as we're taught in the church, whether your God is just nature and the world around you, if you desire to serve and do something good, then you're called. And I think that as a reflection point, that we can learn from that. And there are things that we can do without waiting for a church authority to turn around and tell us to go and do good in the world. It's back to that hymn my mum used to sing. So wake up and do something more than dream of your mansions above. There is plenty of work all around right now, opportunities right in your way. And I find this feels into those there. And I just wanted to reflect on that. How do you see this scripture, having just been really passionate about it myself?
Okay, well, actually, the reason why this is here is because this is February 1829. So that's why it's there, because section 3 is supposedly sometime around July 1828, and then the next section 5 is when Martin comes to visit, which is in March of 1829. So that's why it's in the Doctrine and Covenants is generally, not completely, but generally in chronological order. So that's why it's in sandwich in between these two verses. But this is really important because one of the things that is really big for the Smiths family is that they are divided on religion. Lucy Mack Smith, and with Hiram and Sophronia and Samuel all joined the Presbyterian Church. And Joseph Smith Senior is like Martin Harris, 20 years older, but he is a universalist. He believes in the universal salvation of man, and he doesn't believe in, structured, organized churches. And Joseph Smith Jr. follows his father and this splits the family in terms of their religious devotion. So one of the big issues in the Smith family is their divide over religious understandings. And Joseph, in engaging in the production of the Book of Mormon, this has changed his father's heart. Joseph Smith Jr. has been able to convert his father. And this is the first evidence that we have of it in February 1829, where Joseph gives this revelation to his dad. Remember, his dad has always been the patriarch of the family. He's been the one leading the family in spiritual ways. In fact, he's been leading his son Joseph in, spurring, organized religion. And now Joseph Smith Jr. is giving a blessing, a revelation, almost like his own patriarchal blessing to his father. So this changes the relationship. It suggests that Joseph Jr. is now the spiritual head of the family, and Joseph Smith Sr. is now taking his lead from his son and falling under line with what Joseph is deeming to be religiously important for the family, which is the production of the Book of Mormon, but it's spiritual overtones. And effectively, this revelation is giving a calling to Joseph Smith Sr. to support the work from the son. The son is giving this calling. God is giving the calling through the son to the father. So this marks a major change in the Smith family dynamics, particularly their division. The division is now being healed, and it's being healed by Joseph Smith Jr., who is engaging in this work, and it's providing the fruits, which is Joseph Smith Sr. coming to the fold, basically. So this is really important. And the other point that I think you touched on, the idea of if you have desires to serve God, you're called to the work. And this is this makes its way into the dictation sequence of the Book of Mormon, because in the early parts of when Joseph Smith has lost the manuscript, he begins again at where that finishes. So Mosiah is the first book of the Book of Mormon. It's the earliest one we have. The replacement text comes later. It comes at the end of the dictation sequence in Fayette, New York. But in Mosiah and Alma, what you see from the people that are in the text, the characters that are in the text, they just need to have a desire to serve God, and they are called to the work. Alma doesn't get his hands laid upon his head and told that he's now the prophet. He has a desire. He's heard Abinadi, and he has a desire to serve God, and so he's called to the work. He goes out to the waters of Mormon and he baptizes people to come. We don't know of any, authority that he has. We don't know that he's been, called on. This is the same calling that effectively, King Benjamin has. This is the calling that Abinadi has. This is the calling that even Mosiah has. So it's not structured like this at the beginning of the church. The structure of being called to the work by having your hands laid upon you for the gift of the Holy Ghost, laid upon you for being set apart as a teacher and a priest, that doesn't happen till Moroni in the Book of Mormon. And Moroni is, I think, one of the last books to be written. It's effectively the church handbook of instructions. It's the first church handbook of instructions. So, but in this particular point, in February 1829, when DNC, the Revelation for Doctrine and Covenants, Section 4, is being received, none of that is being envisioned. There's no such thing as a church, like with officers and people are doing. The idea of a church is just people willing to serve and being called to the work just because they want to be involved in the work. And that's what Joseph Jr. is imparting to his father with this revelation.
That must be really exciting for the members of the church, actually. If that was the worldview and the way that the church is starting is come and join in and just serve. Actually, that's probably quite a really exciting space to be.
That's what we see in the other revelations, right? Because that's what Doctrine and Covenants section 6 says to Oliver Cowdery. That's what Doctrine and Covenants section 11 says to Hiram Smith. That's what Doctrine and Covenants 12 says to Joseph Knight Sr. You know, they're being if they have a desire, they are called to the work.
Ganesh, thank you. I'm going to go down and lie down in the corner in a minute. I feel like I have learned so much from you, and I'm not uneducated in church doctrine and in the gospel of these things. I like to think I know what I'm talking about, if you know what I mean. But I've learned a lot from you tonight, and I want to thank you personally as well as from a sort of professional podcasting point of view for that. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Couple of thoughts for reflection. And if you have any thoughts for reflection to add on the end, feel free. We've been talking about Martin Harris. We've been talking about those 116 pages and how the church uses that as an example of gaining a testimony of the Book of Mormon, how the church and how making sure we're facing the right direction, if you like. Does the story of Martin Harris and the lost manuscript, and I'm thinking to those people that are watching, listening, and again, as I always say, although I haven't really stayed, pop your thoughts in the chat. I'm really interested to know what the audience are thinking, feeling as well. If you're a faithful member of the church, how does this story enhance your testimony? I'm really, really interested to know, when we dig into the detail under the bonnet of what was going on, how does this impact your testimony? If it strengthens it, tell me how. I'd love to find out. If you're in a different situation, what impact does this story have in the way you look at the authenticity of the Book of Mormon? Does this add credibility to the Book of Mormon as a sacred text? Or does it lend credibility towards the argument that it might be something else? As I've said in every episode I've done this, my job here is to convince you one way or the other. I just want to share some of the background of these things that existed that we tend to ignore within the church, and allowing you to think about that. So I think my point for reflection is, what does this story say to you? Have you got any thoughts, anything that you think is worth reflecting on from here as well?
My biggest takeaway when I'm trying to learn is I try and envision what is it that is happening to these people in this moment, because I think that the best way to look at the text is understanding who's there in the room at the time, what are the issues that are facing them, what are they trying to understand or relate or explain. So that really, when I look at what's happening behind the text, who's there, when is this happening, what are the other factors that are going on that people are concerned about at the time, it's really interesting to know. And that Doctrine and Covenants section 5 is in the backdrop of Martin really wanting to know, because his wife is putting really big pressure on him. She's bringing a lawsuit against Joseph. So if you know that, and the weight that he's feeling, it makes much more an understanding why he's traveled all the way back to Harmony to kind of confront Joseph about the physicality of the plates. When you look at, I think that one of the other big things to do, if you're going to look at this, you need to look at the various versions of these particular revelations. Like if it's in the Revelation book, what does it say? If it's in the 1833 Book of Commandments, what does it say? How does that differ from the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants section? Because the alterations to the text give you insights into what is happening at the time, what happens a little bit later as people reflect on these revelations, and how things are changed by 1835 too, because some of the things that we've talked about today are an 1835 understanding of what's going on. And you need to go back to the earlier Revelation book or the doctrine, the Book of Commandments, to get a look at the text before it was massaged a bit. So what is going on? Who is responsible for what is being said? How it's being relayed? What is then going on from that point of time? And when you do that, it's a very beautiful human story of people grappling with faith and events and the unseen world that they want to engage in, and God and their faith and their testimony. And actually those things are so human, they apply to us today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I've suddenly realised you sent me loads of homework to do. So because I'm not busy enough with work and everything else that I'm doing, I've now got a load of homework to do as well. So I'd like to thank you for that. Ganesh, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. I am so chuffed that you agreed to come on my humble podcast and have this conversation. I think you brought something today which is well beyond what I expected, and I just want to thank you for that. I know you have plenty of other content out there. I know that obviously I've become aware of you because of some of the content you put out on other platforms. If I wanted to follow you further and be able to see the things that you're sharing and talking about, and perhaps gain more insights from your deep knowledge of the early church history, where can I do that?
So I have a TikTok channel, and I'm going through all of the revelations and talking about them and all, anything in the background that is worth knowing. So I do that on TikTok, but then not everybody has TikTok or access to TikTok. So I then combine those TikTok videos into YouTube videos, and I put them on my channel. So if you just search for Ganeshji Cherian, you'll find me. It's and I'm also on other podcasts. So Latter Day Digest, I've done a number of podcasts with them, and also with Mormonish, and I just recently did one with Mormonism Live. I've also done a Mormon Stories too. So you can go, and I try and detail some of the things that are happening behind the text that we can understand from the historical record, from the reminiscences of other people. I'm really interested. And as we talked about earlier, I'm writing a book to try and give a good chronological understanding of how all of these bits fit together, so you can see a progression as the humans involved are dealing with the what's going on in their particular moment. So
fantastic. Well, thank you very much. If you have TikTok, follow Ganesh on TikTok. I do, and I do because I enjoy the content. It's some really, really deep and insightful stuff that comes through. Obviously, you're far more podcast traveled than I am. I've managed to make it onto. I was on the 21st Century Saints a couple of weeks ago, which was pretty awesome. But that's my limit on my podcast tour at the moment. So I'm a little in awe of you. And like I said, I'm glad to have you here today.
They're exceptional, and I did a podcast with Nemo too, last month. So that was
Nemo, such a nice guy, such a nice guy.
Oh, fabulous. And I love the British Saints too, because of course, New Zealand and Britain share a lot of commonalities. But I think one of the other really interesting commonalities is the relationship to the church. And we're outside of the mainstream American church, which means we see things from a completely different point of view. And I think that lends to a deeper understanding of how that impacts across the world.
Do you know what, Ganesh? I think you have a really good point. I think that there is an episode to come. Maybe we take that offline and have a chat. It'd be interesting to get yourself in New Zealand, a couple of us from the UK, maybe find some other podcasters from around the world, and actually examine what the LDS experience is like outside of Utah, particularly. But that's something to part for another time. It's been fantastic today. I want to wrap things up because time is against us, and I've kept you half an hour longer than I promised, and I do apologise for that.
In fact,
In terms, what I would say, it's been fantastic. Obviously, we're going to carry on following church history this year because we're doing Come Follow Me. We would love if you would be up for it. We'd love to have you back on maybe in a couple of months' time, and look at some of the other aspects of the history of the church as it progresses over the year.
happy to. This is something I'm passionate about, and I love the other things that lend to the understandings behind the text. So that's all.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, if you're still with us tonight, if you still be listening to the broadcast, an hour and a half in, having lost the first 10 minutes because I can't make my virtual studio work correctly, thank you for being here. I promise to do better with my virtual studio next time round. In the meantime, if you're still with me, there's a couple of things I really need you to do for me. And these are just really practical stuff to get the message that we're talking about out to the community as a whole. If you like the content we're doing, look down below us on the screen somewhere. There's going to be buttons that says something like subscribe, and there's another one that says like. Latter-day Digest. You've coined that perfectly, complete with some purple and green hearts. Fantastic. Please share, like, and subscribe. It helps the algorithm to understand us. It helps the work we're doing to get out to a wider audience. So, if you like what we're doing, please do that. If you don't, you've got all my social media handles across the bottom of the slide there. Get in touch with me and tell me why. Talk to me. I'm always willing to talk about these things with anyone, and would love to get in contact. Next week, I need to change that slide. It's not Doctrine and Covenants section 3 to 5 at all. It's Doctrine and Covenants 6 to 9 is the content for next week. On Sunday evening, live at 5 on Sunday night, we're going to do a review of the last month's Come Follow Me, and I'm excited to be joined at the moment by Mormon Civil War by Peter Bleakley from Mormon Civil War. Yes, you're welcome. If you're around, Ganesh, you're welcome to join us as well. What we're going to do is we're going to look back at the January's Come Follow Me and reflect on what we've learned from that and what those experiences are. Live at 5 Sunday evening, UK time, not New Zealand time. I'd love to have you with you. In the meantime, it's been a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for your time, Ganesh. My name's Beyond Belief, and it's been a pleasure having you with us today.